This is one of the most impressive war movies ever made. And the biggest problem with it is John Wayne.
Didn't mean that, sir. What did you mean?
I didn't expect this movie to work as well as it does. It's basically an acted documentary of D-Day, and it somehow manages to show the scope of the invasion. The Allies, the French resistance, the Germans, without turning it into a cheesy Hollywood hero story. And when it's focused on scale and logistics, it's genuinely awe-inspiring. But every time John Wayne shows up, it's like the movie briefly turns into a different film. It's the only performance here that pulled me out of it consistently. And it's wild because the rest of the production is doing almost everything right. So the question for me isn't, is it good? The question is, does the scale and ambition outweigh the weak acting and the weird levity that they throw in? Welcome back to The Rank. I'm John. Just a quick heads up on format. I'll do a handful of behind-the-scenes facts and information that I call the potent notables. Then I'll do a movie overview with spoilers. And I'll finish by ranking the movie across 10 categories. And today I'm going to be continuing to rank the 1962 Best Picture nominees with The Longest Day, starring John Wayne and Robert Mitchum, adapted from the book of the same name by Cornelius Ryan. But let's dive in, starting with the potent notables.
Potent notables.
So as always, we start the potent notables with the box office info. The Longest Day made $39.1 million domestically and $11 million internationally for a worldwide total of $50.1 million. And this was against a budget of $10 million, which made it the most expensive black and white movie ever made until Schindler's List 30 years later. And that budget can be seen in the production. For instance, while clearing a section of the Normandy beach at Pointe du Hoc, the crew unearthed a tank that had been buried in the sand since the invasion. Mechanics cleaned it off, fixed it up, and it was used in the movie as part of a British tank regiment. They also used an estimated 23,000 troops, but were supplied by the US, Britain, and France for this movie. The Germans actually only appeared as officers in speaking roles. But that commitment to realism wasn't always safe. During the filmings of the landings at Omaha Beach, the extras appearing as American soldiers didn't want to jump off the landing craft into the water because they thought it'd be too cold. Robert Mitchum, who played General Norm Coda, was so disgusted with them that he jumped in first, at which point the soldiers had no choice but to follow him. They tried to go even further with the authenticity. During night drop scenes in San Mariglis, the town shut down traffic, closed stores, and cut power so paratroopers could jump into a real environment. It still proved too dangerous though, as several jumpers were injured. One of them actually broke 2 legs. So they ultimately had to abandon real jumps and go with rigged ones. And in one of the stranger full circle moments, Richard Todd, who plays Major John Howard in the movie, actually participated in the real D-Day. In fact, there's a scene where a soldier runs up to his character to relay battlefield information, which is exactly what Todd had to do during the actual invasion. So it's like a real meta moment. So in terms of authenticity, effort, and scale, this movie is almost unmatched, which makes one of the casting decisions even stranger. The real Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, the paratrooper John Wayne portrays, was reportedly unhappy they cast Wayne. He thought Wayne was far too old and overweight to convincingly play a man in his 20s. And speaking of John Wayne, he requested and received a $250,000 salary for this movie, which was 10 times more than everyone else made. All of which kind of perfectly sums up The Longest Day. Incredible authenticity, unbelievable scale, and a few choices that quietly undermine. But with that in mind, let's go to the movie overview. So when the movie opens, it introduces itself with some percussion. Lets us know we're in for an epic, along with some Germans shooting people in the back in case you were wondering who were the bad guys in World War II. And then a Frenchman in Normandy making fun of a German officer, asking if this overweight bicycling German officer was the epitome of the master race. And with this opening, the movie's telling the audience, this is going to have a large scale to it. It's going to take itself seriously, but it's also going to try to add in moments of levity. But the scale of this movie is that it's going to try to show us D-Day from several different perspectives. The troops waiting on the ships, the paratroopers waiting in camps, the French resistance fighters within France, the French that are fighting outside of France, the British, the American, and even the Germans. Now, that's a lot to take on, but for the most part, it handles it really well. What I find interesting about this is that what is presented from the German perspective is showing them as basically dysfunctional. We see them get distracted by boobies, they don't listen to intelligence, their bureaucracy is a mess because of the Führer. Just all around, they seem to be bumbling. Now, I'm not saying that this is an accurate. But why I find it interesting is that it kind of shows that the Allies were really kind of lucky. It's surprising to me because I would have thought this would have been more like, rah, rah, go America, go Allies, which it still somewhat is. But it's not afraid to show us how tenuous the victory was. So the beginning of this movie is the build up to when D-Day gets greenlit. It wants the audience to feel the tension of the Allied soldiers who know an invasion is coming, but they're just not sure when it's going to happen. That there was danger inherent because of the weather not being optimal. But if they keep delaying it, they're going to lose momentum and advantage. Not only that, but we see the tension of the German officers awaiting invasion, or the lack of tension is really what we're seeing. They know it's coming, but they seem nonplussed about it. They really seem to be believing in their own superiority. Now, I'm not a World War II historian, but I do have to wonder if this is accurate of the German officers in 1944. I would think that by that point, they would have to be reading the tea leaves at least a little bit, but I could be wrong. Our World War II aficionados can let me know in the comments. So we get introduced to the various characters or real people that are going to be portrayed in this film. Honestly, the amount of people they portray are really too many to list. So let's focus on a few here. For instance, for the Germans, Rommel, Van Rundstedt, and Marx, to name a few, and they're fascinating. They really give you a sense of what it was like to command troops when all decisions have to go through one irascible tyrant leader, in der Führer. On the Allied side, we get Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin van der Voort, played by John Wayne. And before I go on, I'm not looking for the smoke from John Wayne lovers. This is the first John Wayne movie that I've ever actually seen, so I don't know what he was like in the other ones. I'm not trying to judge him against that. I don't know how good of an actor he is in those, but in this one, he's not good. He's just plain bad. Sorry. But Lieutenant Colonel van der Voort is a paratrooper commander, and we see how he inspires his troops. It's one of those rare times where I feel like the charisma and speech of the actual person was probably better than the charisma and speech by the charismatic actor. Some others are Robert Mitchum excellently portraying Brigadier General Norman Coda, Major John Howard played by Robert Todd, and Private Steele played by Red Buttons. There was one other person that was portrayed in this movie that I didn't really understand, and that was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. I'm not saying that Teddy Jr. didn't have a role to play in the actual D-Day. It's just that I think we could have removed his whole portion of the film. And I don't know that it would have changed how we felt about what was going on or given us any less clarity on the D-Day operations. I love Henry Fonda, but it really just felt like they put this character in the movie because his name was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. So we do get some small stories throughout the movie within the D-Day planning and execution, like the soldier that wins $2,500 gambling and then never fires a shot during the invasion. Now, I know they did this so that we would have something to watch and be entertained by, but these little stories didn't really do much for me. What I was really impressed by was the absolute scale of this effort. They were trying to show all the different pieces of this invasion and how things went right and how things went wrong, where they happened and why they needed to happen where they did, and how the effectiveness of fooling the Germans about where they were going to land for the invasion saved a lot of lives. It wasn't shown as like a perfectly pulled off heist, but as a complex operation with lots of mistakes that were overcome by bravery and determination, and a little luck. The scenes of the men storming the beaches at Normandy, while maybe not as harrowing as the scene from Saving Private Ryan, were certainly awe-inspiring. There's such an interesting connection between modern films and films from this era. The gunfighting and sounds of war are still there, but there's no blood. The stunt work is obviously not as effective, but that doesn't mean that the film fails. Therefore, with films of this era, they are forced to rely on the emotion of the moment instead of the look, at least not as much. Whereas with modern films, they often rely on the more precise stunt work and blood and CGI to drive the point home. So they use that visual medium that we're able to do now that they couldn't do back then to create that emotion. And because I grew up in my era, I feel an automatic inclination to the latter, but I can certainly appreciate this. The film succeeds in the minutia and in the macro. For instance, removing charges from a bridge they need to take, or showing how the French resistance helped by taking out German communication lines or German trains, were excellent and show how much planning went into every little bit of this. From the macro perspective, it excels at presenting the scope of the invasion. Where it lags is in almost every scene that John Wayne is in, and also when it tries to provide levity. And I'm not saying it was bad to try to add levity, but that was basically Sean Connery's role in this. That's all about making fun of bagpipes and stuff. And, you know, Sean Connery is not like the comedic genius or anything, you know? Or other areas of levity where they're trying to show French people as just sort of nuts, which, you know, it's true. And I'm sure there were plenty of moments in the actual invasion where there was levity. But in this case, whenever it happened, it felt like I was watching a different movie. The good moments like Eisenhower saying that they're gonna go, or the French commander talking about the gravity of invading their own homeland, or Rommel realizing that they were gonna lose the war because nobody was willing to wake the Fuhrer after he took some sleeping pills, or every scene with Robert Mitchum far outweigh the bad. But that's the movie. Let's find out how it ranked.
A rank.
So the rank is where I rank the movie based on 10 categories: story, acting, originality, film coherence, cinematography, score/soundtrack/sound, script structure and dialogue, character relatability, production value, and my rank. I rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And before I dive into the rankings here, I just want to say, if you're enjoying this episode, please leave a like down below. It really does help me out. But without further ado, the first category is story. And the story is the D-Day invasion of June 6, 1944, and all the different perspectives of that day. They didn't try to dramatize it or put a love story in it or make it bigger or smaller than what it already was. So here's the trouble I'm having. It kind of relies on the audience knowing context. But, I mean, is knowing the context of World War II something that will stand the test of time? I kind of think so. So I went with a 9.5. And that brings us to acting. John Wayne, not a good actor in this. As I said, this is the only John Wayne movie I've ever seen, so I don't know if it was just this movie, but what I do know is that every time he was on screen, it was like watching a kid try to lie for the first time. He goes through the motions of what actors are supposed to do, and it results in him looking like he's not real at all. Honestly, I don't want to completely bag on John Wayne here because there's honestly not a lot of great acting in it. And I don't know if it was just that acting is different now than it was then, or maybe I've just gotten used to more subtlety in acting now, or if it's just not as good. Either way, for me, it was the weakest part of the movie. I gave it a 6. But just as a side note here, I want to highlight real quick, everything Robert Mitchum did, fantastic. Best part of the acting of the movie. So that brings us to originality. This is a strong category for me here, because while this is a war movie, which had definitely been done before, this felt like more of an acted documentary. This was trying to present facts and give people the scope of D-Day while still being entertaining. It also presented several different perspectives, which I found pretty unique, especially since it didn't actually present the perspectives as bad versus good, which it could easily have done. It just trusted the audience to know which was which. It was impressive and worthy of a high originality score, so I gave it a 9.25. That brings us to film coherence. Now, this is a category where the movie needed to shine, and it did. It shows all the moving parts of this day and how incredibly crazy and difficult it was to pull off, and it does it exceptionally well. The only knocks I gave it are the superfluous scenes with Teddy Roosevelt Jr. in it. Now, I'm not going to hammer it on that because I think the purpose of his role in the movie here was to show that not everything went as planned on the beaches as well. But still, it felt like the only reason he was really there was because his name was Teddy Roosevelt Jr. Also, they had some comedic moments in this, especially with Sean Connery being comedic relief, and the Frenchman with the weird hat that greeted the Allies with champagne, which just felt weird. But that being said, this was kind of a monumental undertaking and difficult to present to audiences and have them keep it all straight. And in spite of that complexity, they did it remarkably well, so I gave it a 9.5. So that brings us to cinematography. They had some moments of cinematography in this that felt amazing. For instance, where we see the beaches from the perspective of the German pilots and their fighter planes was incredible. I thought it was great for moments like that. And I can't think of anything that would be too much of a detraction other than things that are just, because it's older, like bad backgrounds and stuff, but that's not necessarily cinematography's fault. That's just the technology hadn't caught up with it yet. So I decided to go with a 9.25. So that brings us to score/soundtrack/sound. And this was pretty weak in my opinion. As far as sound was concerned, it was pretty decent, I guess, but the score was just blah. It didn't really do much for me except for one part where it weaved in Beethoven for the victory formation, and I thought that was fun. But even the triumphant music when the Allies make it off of Omaha Beach is just not that great. I gave it a 5.5. So that brings us to script structure and dialogue. And I'm absolutely going to give credit to the structure of this script. And I'm probably going to rate this on a curve because this was a really difficult thing to try to pull off. So dialogue wasn't that great, but it wasn't really the point either. And that being said, there were still some profound moments in it. Like when we get the first French speech about firing on their land, or when we get a rumination by the guy who'd never fired his weapon during the entire invasion, and he says, "I wonder who won." That's really great stuff. Altogether, I think it was great. I gave it a 9.25. So this brings us to character relatability. This isn't necessarily the point of the movie either. You're not being presented with characters as much as you are figures from history. There are a couple of characters in it, but it's not meant to make you feel for them or empathize with them. Interestingly, probably the characters that are easiest to empathize with are the Germans because of the difficulty they have in dealing with their bureaucracy. Like, you can empathize with their frustration. They're hamstrung by the fact that they're in a dictatorship. But I decided to go with an 8. So that brings us to production value, and there's no doubt that they pulled out all the stops to make this feel like it was actually D-Day on the screen. And for the most part, they did exactly that. There were only a few times where it really felt like, okay, this is clearly a movie. But they were small and likely just limitations of the technology of the time. I gave it a 9.75. So that brings us to my rank. So I enjoy history, and from that standpoint, I really liked this movie a lot. But there were some weird comedic moments in here, which felt like it threw me off a little bit. John Wayne's acting was definitely not enjoyable for me. So between the historical interest and the bad acting, I met in the middle and went with a 7.75. So altogether, that puts The Longest Day at an 83.75, which makes it I'd watch it again. This puts it 1.25 points ahead of Lawrence of Arabia, which officially makes the Academy voters wrong for the 1962 year. And means right now it is the best of 1962, but I still have 3 more to do. As far as all time, this ties The Longest Day with Atonement, putting it just below Michael Clayton and just above Peyton Place. And if you're ranking along with me, drop your score for this one in the comments. But thanks for listening and or watching. Check out any of my other Best Picture nominee rankings or any of my other movie or sitcom rankings on this channel. Remember to subscribe, comment, and like. For up-to-date rankings, check out my website at therankedpodcast.com, where you can also email me at john@therankedpodcast.com. And if you really want to become a supporter, you can support us at patreon.com/therankedpodcast. But as the Aussies would say, goodie day. During night drop scenes and
Cut!
Sam Maraglis. During night drop scenes in
Cut!
During night drop scenes in Saint Maraglis.
Cut!
Take 3.
Saint Maraglis. Aglis? Fuck man, French,